Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Wildcard week, today is day 3, Friday. Usually this is McFarlane Day, and I figured since we've only got one real issue of Spawn credited to McFarlane left, as far as the art goes, which is Spawn 24, I'll be reviewing that next week. There's also Spawn Batman, which I do think officially, and I'll talk about it in the review, is the last bit of McFarlane comic book artwork that we're going to get from him. And since usually on Fridays we review McFarlane stuff, I figured we'd go McFarlane adjacent a little bit. With this find from a few years ago, I remember kind of seeing ads and stuff back in the day, but only recently found this issue and literally just bought it on the strength of the cover and the interior art, as it's the same artist. And one of the, back in the day in the 90s, what I would call the McFarlane clones. Put them in the same category as maybe Stephen Platt. I see a lot of similarities between their early artwork here. Obviously, like I said, McFarlane clone, taking a lot of his inspiration, a lot of his ticks and styles as far as the cape goes, and these little tick lines on the shadows, and just the general approach to the drawing and the aesthetic is definitely, he's pulling very hard from McFarlane. But as we'll find out at the end of the issue, as I go through his profile, the artist, I'll just mention it now, is 18 years old when he's doing this. This is 1993. So, Image has just come out, really hot, I guess, and he's, I got to give it to this guy who at the time was 18 years old. When I was 18, I was still drawing and stuff, but to pull off a full-length comic like this, I mean, this is issue 1, but I believe there were at least a few issues. Even just one issue is quite a feat for someone of that age, so I'm quite impressed by it, even though, like I said, he is aping McFarlane a lot. But I think he does it well, generally, for an 18-year-old guy. If this guy kept drawing, he probably improved a lot, maybe moved away a little bit from the McFarlane influence. And even if he didn't, like I said, definitely a lot of potential. As you can see from the cover here, I mean, it's not far off overall from what McFarlane was doing at the time. A lot of Spawn influence, obviously, in this comic with the cape and the look and stuff. Some Wolverine mixed in there, I guess. There's some Heaven and Hell elements, that weave through this issue, anyways. So the comic is called VORTEX, presented by Hall of Heroes. No idea what that is. Some independent kind of publisher from the early 90s. And again, this is issue 1. And it does specifically say that VORTEX is copyright 1993 Matthew Martin. So definitely post-Image, where guys are creating a lot of these indie characters and modeled after or inspired by what Image did, making sure that they retain the rights to the character. So not a bad thing. Image, obviously, doing things more from the commercial side of things, but still pushing for creator rights. Maybe not in the same way that those original, more indie creators were looking at it. But, they were very successful with it, and they rode that early 90s boom, right? The bubble until it burst. So this is definitely one of the guys, again, who followed in their footsteps and was probably inspired a lot by what they did. Excuse me. So cover, like I said, is pretty cool. Let's have a look inside. I like this drawing here. I can see like the McFarlane tropes, but I feel like we're getting a bit of this guy's individual style in there as well. I don't know how to describe it, but it's just not, as some images seem to be very fully just kind of, let me say, a McFarlane ripoff, in a good way. This one seems to have a little bit more individuality to it, even though it's still using some of those McFarlane tropes. And so this character, like it sometimes pulls his mask over his face and sometimes it's down. I don't know. I guess he wants to take the chance to show his face emote a bit more when we see the bottom of his face. Maybe, again, something taking inspiration from Spawn. So VORTEX #1, first printing, a Matt Martin Comics title, published in cooperation with Hall of Heroes, whoever they are. Hall of Heroes is owned by Alan Stewart, okay, whoever he is. And VORTEX, again, copyright Matthew T. Martin. So story-wise, I gotta say, it's just, somewhat amateurish, but I'm mostly looking at the art here because we're just thrown right into it, and it just feels a lot like the same scenario as Spawn. The dialogue is clearly written by an 18-year-old, and that's okay. This is what it is for its time and when it came out. And again, I still give major props to this guy for drawing up this whole comic. Proportion-wise, the heads are always a little bit big, so I don't know if that's a personal choice or where that's coming from. But again, if you look at all the shadow work and the hatching over here, even the flames, very much taken from the McFarlane aesthetic. The hands here, very Spawn-like. The burnt face. There are moments though where like something like this is totally not McFarlane to me. So like I said, there's interjections here of, I guess, what he feels at that point is important to move. It's important to move away from, you know, rigidly following the McFarlane aesthetic and doing something that needs to work for that moment and the storytelling, right? He does it here again. This demon kind of dragon thing, I mean, I could almost believe that McFarlane drew this if I didn't know it was in this comic. You know, not so much this stuff here, but this is very convincing to me. Pretty darn close to actual McFarlane. And here's like kind of a fun burnt face Spawn shot, but with the nose, so it looks a little bit different. The eyes, you know, there's just a different aesthetic to it here. Not too bad in the foreshortening here. You know, I'll give it to him. I don't feel like McFarlane often attempts, you know, this kind of shot. Although I wouldn't have cut the foot off. So here's another good example where I feel like he's, you know, he'll mention at the end, the artist in his profile, that his favorite issue of any comic is, I think, Amazing Spider-Man 316, he says. I'll confirm that when we get to the end. But you can see that he's definitely taken a lot of inspiration from that McFarlane run on Spider-Man. This is definitely, you know, taken from some Peter Parker and Mary Jane stuff. The hairstyle is 100% a McFarlane line for hair. I've not seen many other artists use that for example, for Mary Jane's hair at Marvel Comics in the early 90s. And this kind of stuff, this design work that he does where, you know, stuff's running down, creating this face, and then that's running down, creating the skull face, and the skull face then is breaking up into solid mass. So this is liquid, but this is solid. Like, that's pretty interesting. Possibly some inspiration from McFarlane, but kind of pushed further once again. To go from liquid to solid down here is just, I just find it kind of interesting. Skulls are very McFarlane-ish, very kind of Skeletor. You know, the reason I'm pulling out this book is because there were a lot of McFarlane imitators, and some did it horribly. I just find this is one example of a guy who does it pretty well overall. Although, once again, there are some shots that I feel are not McFarlane at all. Or McFarlane. I'm still saying McFarlane, guys. This shot here feels like, you know, either he did that himself or maybe he, you know, looked at something else or swiped from somewhere else other than some McFarlane stuff. That doesn't feel like McFarlane other than maybe little bits of hatching here. This does, right? He's always, you know, this trope of using the cape like Spawn, McFarlane does in Spawn. This guy's doing as well. He's using all those early image tricks, right? This is one panel, but he's split it into two. These two overlap, so it creates that, it's definitely that McFarlane design aesthetic as well, the storytelling, right? The cues, storytelling cues are very similar. Not a bad job at the Porsche. That's where I think we lose a lot of the McFarlane as well. Probably photo referenced or possibly traced, which is fine. Clearly he specifically wanted that Porsche car there, but then he kind of sacrificed the background over here. I mean, in a situation like this, to me, at worst, you maybe fill that in all black or something to make it a little more interesting. I don't know. Doesn't quite work for me. Or you throw in some minimal backgrounds, right? Weird things like, this is a pretty cool shot of the character, but what are these two buildings kind of butting up against each other? Just kind of find that illustration there kind of weird. Again, you can see what comics he's reading when you get to this stuff here. To me, it feels very much like he's taking some inspiration from Ghost Rider, right? I mean, I don't think I'm saying something that's not obvious here, right? Probably a guy who followed all of the McFarlane stuff and, you know, incorporated all the stuff that he liked from Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, Spawn, right? The time period seems about right for that. Profiles need a little bit of work here. Looks a little odd, right? A little amateurish. And, you know, here's a good example where, you know, I don't think he's doing a McFarlane or anything. I think he did some life drawing here and actually looked at his hand, which makes it look, you know, even though he's tried to McFarlaneize it with this hatching down here, it makes it look a little bit more like a, you know, a slight amateur drawing a hand, more so than what McFarlane would have done. I mean, he's got the McFarlane skulls down, that's for sure. And this is kind of an interesting shot where now our character, I mean, he's already got the cross, but he starts to look almost more priest-like because of the way the cape is draped over his arms and stuff. Kind of an interesting little look there. That's cool. This panel too here, I think is pretty cool. Parallel lines all throughout, you know, looks like, I guess, because of the Catholic overtones in this, you know, someone who's been saved, you know, if that's kind of the impression they're going for, I think that works. Or maybe he's being judged according to the dialogue. I'm not quite sure. I gotta be honest, I can't read all of this. I'm mostly, again, for something like this, I'm looking at the artwork. I'm appreciating the McFarlaneisms, right? This whole way of shadowing a volume. Very McFarlane. But again, I'm impressed by the fact that such a young person, 18-year-old, would be able to do a complete comic like this. You know, lack of background, sure, but there's some interesting design work, you know, some action-packed stuff. This works really well, I think, with the movement and all. And I almost feel like, you know, all that we have for McFarlane in this panel is the aesthetic. Everything else is this guy kind of composing that, and I think that's a pretty good composition. Then he reverts back to, you know, this is definitely the McFarlane lady nose and the McFarlane mouth. And then, yeah, when we get to these action moments, he throws in all these, you know, speed lines and dynamics and stuff, I think is where he really shines, where he kind of, again, the only thing that really stays that's McFarlane is the aesthetic. And it's almost like, you know, as he's working towards the end of the comic, he's finding his own style more and more and letting go of the crutch, I guess, of the McFarlane stuff. You know, he's still taking some inspiration from it, the skull, but he's really toned down the level of noodling, you know, what the McFarlane noodling that he always talks about. And I would dare to say that, you know, in the way that things are busy and overlapping in this panel here, his compositions are competing with, if not even slightly better than McFarlane's, possibly. McFarlane gets away with a lot with his design work, how he places stuff, how he composes the page, but the actual, you know, action, storytelling, and draftsmanship and layering of elements in this panel is really solid. You know, it could be confusing, but I don't find it as. I can clearly see what's going on. It's pretty darn cool. He's not using debris. He's using actual, well, some debris. Things are breaking, right? Screws and whatever, but like not just random shapes, just actual things are what the debris, excuse me, are composed of. Pretty hard foreshortened shot here. I think it works pretty well. Again, not something I feel like, well, there might be examples of McFarlane trying something like that more in Spider-Man. You can tell sometimes when artists, you know, you're really into drawing this and you're really into drawing this here, but not so much into drawing this guy just sitting there on the couch. So that drawing feels like it's suffered a bit. Not a lot of time spent on that one compared to other stuff in the comic. But again, very impressed with the total output up to here. Few things don't work quite as well here. I don't know, there's something, I like this panel on its own, but the way it leads into this one, maybe it's just this one too that annoys me, where he's done the old Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, you know, vertical, horizontal hatching thing for the background, but really tight, and I feel like it should breathe a bit more. The line should be further apart, both horizontally and vertically, just so it, you know, the line weight and the busyness of the lines here competes with what's actually in the foreground, rather than creating a pattern that evokes the background, right? So thinner lines and more space between the lines would have helped that out a little bit. The idea is good. Just, you know, the follow through wasn't. I like how I guess there's a dark half and a light half, right? You know, it's not, you know, grand literature here, you know, 18-year-old doing this, but like I said, he's already created kind of a mythology surrounding his characters in just the first issue, so almost like the Wonder Twins or something. I don't know. He's doing the McFarlaneisms here, which are interesting. The fact that, you know, if the skull continued, you're kind of on a down angle on them is kind of interesting. They're not like head on, You know, McFarlane tends to do more like flatter things, I guess, generally, where the panels might overlap to layer stuff, but you know, the design work around is a little flatter. This is pretty cool. I like that little detail. And that's the end of our issue. And he pulls out a trick here, which, yeah, definitely more of an indie black and white kind of deal. Maybe Ninja Turtles or whatever. I'm not quite sure what that is. If it is splatter. Very controlled splatter, I guess, that's done on there. But definitely not something that's in McFarlane's wheelhouse or that he ever uses. And that's the end of the issue. Just wanted to mention, I saw this pin up here by artist Trent, and just the signature is Trent, and I was like, could that possibly be, and hopefully I get this name right, but I won't. Trent Kanyuga? I'm going to go with Trent Kanyuga. Could that be him, right? The guy who did this comic, Creed, which I'll talk about later this week. And could that be a weird coincidence, right? Because I had already kind of picked these comics out of the pile. That these were the ones I wanted to review. Definitely think it could be. Creed that I showed you came out in 96. This is 1993. So, you know, again, I see some of the McFarlane-isms here and there. But there's definitely an angular kind of graffiti-like style that is apparent also in Creed later. Even though the level of drawing in Creed is a little better than this. But Trent is another guy who started when... like publishing comics when he was 15 or 16 or something like that. Like, you know, child prodigy artist. So yeah, so we get like a little fun little profile for both the character and the creator or the artist of the series. So that's kind of fun. I'm wondering if he drew that himself, right? So maybe this is a bit closer to his own actual style or something. You know, the head seems still slightly McFarlane inspired, but everything else is just kind of cleaner, maybe a little bit more classic and cartoonier, just like his caricature of himself here. Anyways, I think both drawings here are pretty good. So not so focused on the character, right? He's well, I guess it tells us about the guy, so let's go. So Vortex, his name is Michael Auburn, ages 24, height 6 foot, weight 280. He's from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Okay. Date of birth, October 17th. Eyes are blue. Hair is blonde. All right. Legal status, armed robbery. Manslaughter. Okay. Marital status, single. Current base of operations, Chicago, Illinois. Current occupation, lead guitarist for metal band Demon Slayer. So the guy's clearly into metal. Favorite pastime, pickin' and grinnin'. Not quite sure what that is. Favorite saying, he who puts the Lord on trial puts himself on the stand. Obsession, hard rock. Favorite album, Bride, Snakes in the Playground. I don't know if that's an actual band, but okay, so I'm guessing this guy's into like 80s, late 80s, early 90s kind of hard rock, heavy metal. So the artist's name is Matthew T. Martin. If anyone knows anything about him, if he's still working, if he's still out there, let me know in the comments. Alias, haha, very funny. Inside joke. So he's 18, 5'7", weighs 123 pounds. That's pretty specific. Place of birth, Elkhart, Indiana. Eye color brown, hair color brown. Why would we want to know this? Legal status, no criminal record. Okay, marital status, single. Current base of operations, home. Does that mean his parents' home? Probably. He's 18. If he's 18, that's fine. Citizenship, United States. Current occupation, bum. Okay, favorite pastime, doing nothing. It's kind of odd. He spent a lot of time on this comic, so I wouldn't consider that nothing. Favorite saying, they say a great artist puts his soul into his work. All right. Obsession, drinking Pepsi, and favorite comic, Amazing Spider-Man number 316, as I mentioned earlier. So he gives us a bit of what he calls portfolio work. I feel like this is swiped from somewhere, and maybe not Todd McFarlane, maybe from Jim Lee. Is that possible? Like a Jim Lee Wolverine, but he just drew a different head on it. I feel like I might be onto something there. He's using the McFarlane bubble design there. So again, here, I feel like maybe again, you're getting more of his style and less of the McFarlane. There's something just, I dare say, slightly more dynamic and accurate to it than the McFarlane anatomy. At least in this shot of this warrior guy, whoever he is. I think that's really well done. Needs to work on the ladies, but definitely going at it from the McFarlane aesthetic on that side of things. Babylon the Great. So Statue of Liberty, basically. Yeah, it can be interesting. All right, and then as if to just drive the point home, Trent Canigua. Trent Canigua. I'll try that. Appears once again here with Deadbolt. So I guess that's his own character. So even before Creed, he was doing this stuff. Very interesting style. This guy here, I mean, is 100% pretty much Spawn. But you know, when Trent's doing this, is he like 12 or 13 or something? I don't know, but yeah, he's another guy who started really young. Kind of cool that these guys, I guess, had some sort of contact. Both young, motivated cartoonists, right, who self-published basically. Very cool. And I was surprised to just see this real quick, where I guess this guy's comic at the time was popular enough where he was able to send out, you know, signed and numbered first prints of issue 1. They cost $10. Signed and numbered second print of number 1, $7. So, you know, then I wondered, I guess I've got a first print here, not signed, of course. This is a first printing, so I guess first printings went out of sale pretty quickly. Couldn't tell you for sure. And it says here the original full color character design of Vortex right here, $10. So I'm imagining that's probably a print of this drawing here, colored. As obviously, as you saw, guys, this whole comic, except for the title here, is black and white. So there you go, guys. That's my look at Vortex issue number 1 by Mr. Martin. What was it? Mark Martin? Matthew Martin. Don't know if he went on to do anything else in the art world or to greater successes. If you know anything about him, let me know once again in the comments. And that is our video for today, guys. So if you're still subscribed and you're watching, really appreciate it. We're slowly on the road up to 500 subscribers. That's where YouTube considers us a real channel. Helps us a little bit as far as advertising on, or, you know, putting the video on the right-hand side there in the suggestions. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a second. It really helps the channel out. It helps us grow, helps get us out there to more people who are into comic books just like we are. So thank you guys for watching once again, and have an awesome weekend.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.